So tonight we have Rover Karen back. You may recall her two previous presentations. Karen's been volunteering. In her retirement, she decided to see the country by volunteering at national parks all over the country. And you may recall her talking about her lighthouse duty and then her adventures in Oregon, saving, injured baby seals and stuff. And most recently this year, she was at Arches National Park. And she's going to be talking about that adventure and what it was like being a ranger and what it was like on her days off and where she explored and how you too can do that. Karen's been a rover since 2017, and she's been on the board and currently is the membership director. And she likes hiking, backpacking, biking, cross-country skiing, and her RV, which all makes her a perfect roving ranger. So take it away, Karen.
Okay, I've stopped sharing.
Thanks,
Aaron,
Fran.
you should be able to share now.
Okay, doing that. Okay. Well, as Fran said, I'm Karen Klein, and I'm going to talk to you tonight about Arches National Park, volunteering there. And my job there was a campground host, which was a new volunteer opportunity for me. And so I always like to start with a little grounding of where we are. So this is a map of Arches National Park, and I think most of you probably know that Arches is in Utah. It was established as a national park on November 12th of 1971. It had been a national monument since 1929. It's not a huge park. I mean, this is the picture of the park. It's 119 square miles. What I think is interesting about it is that if you see this red line that goes up the map, that's basically all of the paved roads in the park. And I would say that is what 95% of the visitors that come to the park, that's what they do and where they go. Because off of this road, you see all of the major archers that are featured in the newspaper they always hand out at a park. Where I actually was up here in Devil's Garden Campground. This is 18 miles from the visitor center. It was actually a 40 to 45 minute drive from the visitor center. And then the town of Moab was here, which was another 15 minutes from the park. So anytime I wanted to get groceries or go into Moab for anything, I was looking at least an hour in and an hour back. So it was one of those things that you really had to plan your weekly grocery shopping and those types of things. In the park, there's over 2,000 arches. Most of them, you see the major ones, but it is an area that is just full of arches. And actually the whole landscape, Canyonlands has arches, there's BLM land with arches, lots of arches. The other thing is it's red sandstone mainly in the park, and that contains iron oxide. And that iron can color the rocks red, black, orange, purple, greenish, gray. So that's why you get such pretty colors when you see pictures of the park. The average rainfall is 8 to 10 inches. And I actually experienced about 25% of their rainfall when I was there in one day. So it doesn't, oftentimes it rains for like 15 minutes and it feels like the rain barely makes it to the ground. This one day, it was a deluge of rain. I think we had about an inch and a half, an inch and 3/4 of rain. What was fascinating to me is because it's sandy and it's so porous, by the next day, basically everything was dry and it had all absorbed into the rocks. So as I said, I was the campground host, and you might say, well, what does a campground host do? Or maybe you talk to one when you've gone camping. So here, this campground is reservation only. So I tracked reserve sites, put up reserve signs, but then on occasion there were some open sites or there were no shows. So when there were those, we would put up an open sign and then help people register for them if they came in saying, hey, do you have a campsite? And then my primary job was to welcome campers and provide information. The biggest thing in the informational talk was there was ravens at the park, and ravens are very smart. If you know anything about ravens, and our ravens liked shiny objects. There's a story a few years ago, they flew off with someone's car keys because they had left them on the picnic table. This year, someone came back and they had left out their hand sanitizer and it was shiny in the sun, so the ravens had poked a hole in it. I had someone come to me as I was walking around, making my rounds, and they said, "We just want you to know we found a lot of litter on our site, but it wasn't us." I said, "Well, what are you talking about?" So they brought me to the back of their site, kind of behind some bushes, and there was all this tin foil. And I suddenly realized it's the ravens picking up the foil. And by the time they got there, it was kind of the drop point of, well, there's no more food in this, so they just dropped it. So that was basically, you talk to people about that. Available for questions. People always have questions when they're camping. Sold some firewood, and then monitored campground activity. I would walk the campground a few times a day just to see what was going on. And there was always friendly dogs to greet me, so that was always fun. And then this picture on the left, I was actually doing some work up on that rock, and this woman came. She's like, "That is like such a great picture. Let me take your picture." So it's kind of a fun picture to have. And while I was doing this, usually my last two assignments, I have lived in my RV. This time they said, "Well, we don't have an RV spot, but how about we have a little cabin?" Oh, you know what? I'm not going to go to the cabin quite yet. I'm going to tell you my favorite things about doing this. First of all, the natural beauty was everywhere. It was amazing. I've never lived in a spot that everywhere you looked, there was something pretty to see. And the hiking, I loved it because there was hiking everywhere too. I really enjoyed talking with the campers. To score a camping spot at Arches is kind of a big deal for a lot of people. So people were so happy, and they always acted like I made it happen for them. So I always went along with it. But we talked about camping, we talked about hiking, so that was fun. Lots of physical activity. On days I worked, I had a golf cart, but I chose to walk the campground. There was 53 sites. It probably was about a mile and a half, mile and 3/4. So in the course of a day, I would walk 5 to 7 miles, and it was at altitude of 5,000 plus, and it was up a hill, down a hill, and so I was in great shape. And then I probably hiked 10 to 12 miles on my days off. So lots of physical activity. And one of the things, and this is just, I love any time I volunteer because you have time to explore the area. So it isn't just like, oh, I got to see the major sites. It's learning about all those paths that aren't in any of the brochures that people that work there say, hey, go out and see this, go out and do that. So that's always a lot of fun. And did I mention the natural beauty was everywhere in the hiking? And then also meeting new people. It was always fun. I will tell you, for whatever reason, I was a favorite of young girls. A couple of young girls told their parents that their favorite thing about coming to Arches was Ranger Karen, which was quite cute. And then full disclosure, because I know some of you know this and you probably wonder if I was going to say anything, I also met a great man when I was out there. They always say, if you want to meet someone, go out and do something you love. And I was doing something I loved, and this guy happened to show up and to see if there was an open campsite. And he lived in Eagan, Minnesota, 15 minutes from me. So that was my unexpected bonus of volunteering for this year. I also had a great schedule. It was 4 days on, 4 days off. So there was lots of time to actually go somewhere on my days off and do some more exploring. And like I said, the natural beauty was everywhere and hiking was great. So I lived in this little cabin. I think at one time it was probably an office, but this was a little cabin I lived in. And what I loved about it, off to the right, you see that solar panel. That was my electricity. That panel gave enough electricity to run the cabin, and it never had any issues. The inside was rather simple. Off to the left, there was the kitchen area, and then the back right door was a bedroom. The front right door was a bathroom that was huge, which was clearly a storage closet at one time. And then this is a living room. And as you can tell by looking at the living room furniture, this is where I knew it was definitely an office at one time, because it's probably circa, 80s furniture or so, but it was functional, and I enjoyed it. Now, you always learn something when you volunteer, and one of my learnings this year was, oh, I am sorry, I don't have my slides up. I have a full screen, so my order sometimes as I'm doing this, I'm a little out of order, so I apologize for that. This is views from as I'm walking around the campground. The two top pictures are views of the late afternoon sun. And in all of these pictures, you see, these aren't necessarily clouds, they're actually these mountains. The La Salle Mountains sit on the backside of the campground and actually on the backside of Arches. So they're kind of one of your points of reference all the time, and they're gorgeous. The middle picture is actually a full moon night, and that was taken without a flash. It was that bright. You can actually still see the La Salle Mountains. What I also think is fascinating is that in this lower left-hand picture, this rock is the same as this rock, but without the sun on it. And you can see how much warmer and redder the rock becomes when the sun is on it. But even without the sun on it, it was just a beautiful place. And now my point of learning is we had a water leak. We knew one of our water mains were broken, and obviously in the desert, water is a big deal. So they had done some digging of holes, but they weren't finding it. So what they actually did is they hired this guy, and he came, and if you ever have a water leak, here's what you can do. He pumped helium into the water mains. And then because helium's a lighter gas, it bubbles up. So he started with this red kind of like, almost looks like a Geiger counter or something. So he's running that over, and he had numbers on here that said, yep, the gas is coming up here. So then he changed over to putting on earphones. He put on his earphones, and then he had this cone-like thing that you listen closer. And then he actually got down with his ear to see if it was really there. And I actually leaned over, and you could hear the boom, 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 boom. And sure enough, our maintenance guy dug down, and that's exactly where the water main broke. I just found it fascinating. It's like, who knew you could use helium? So I thought I'd pass that along in case any of you ever have any helium issues, water issues. Helium will be your solve. And since it was Arches National Park, I figured we might as well look at some of the arches. And one of the things is, for those of you that may be wondering, like, why are there so many arches? I actually was looking at this. Sandstone is a rock that is everywhere around the park and around the area. And it's and I may be butchering the name, but it's an Entrada sandstone. It was once a massive desert, and it was pushed down and it formed into hard rock. And then there's also a caramel formation, which is of sand and clays, and it's softer and it resists water. So, and then there's also a very deep salt layer. And that is because it's squeezed by the rock above and below, the salt bulges up. So that's why when we're going to look at some of these rocks, you see some of the white layers. All of that is, and then with water coming in, there's erosion with the softer sandstone, and then it's that caramel formation that stays and makes the arches. So really fascinating. I said many times when I was here, it's like, I'd love to have a geologist to tell me more about the area, but I didn't, so I just enjoyed it. This first arch here is landscape arch. It's one of the, well, it is the longest arch. It's 306 feet across here. And you may notice that this is a really thin piece. This is the one arch you cannot walk under. And the reason is in 1991, there were actually people sitting over here and they started hearing cracking, and they were smart enough to run, because this piece here, this whole piece just tumbled down. So all of this rock you see here actually used to be a part of this arch. So this is one of the arches they think that, you know, at some point in the future, it will probably no longer be an arch and other arches will form. This arch is delicate arch. Typically, if you've seen the Utah license plate, you've seen delicate arch. It's probably one of the most famous photographed arches. Typically, you see it in beautiful, bathed in beautiful red light, because if the sun's on, it's bright. It does look the beautiful red light. If you're there in the early morning, like I was, it's more in the shadows and you see it in more of its natural state. These arches, this arch here is called Double O Arch. And I just think I happen to hit this one right on the sun because you see the beautiful, this is called Desert Varnish, the black, and then some of those other colors that come out with that iron oxide. The beauty of this was so pretty. But what was interesting to me was I actually hiked behind it. And so this is what that smaller O looks like from behind. And the way you can't even tell the other pieces there. So it's always interesting to be able to see things from the front and back. This arch is Tower Arch. And in Tower Arch, you see the whole arch, and then Ashley was able to climb up under it. And this is what it looks like. And again, it just amazes me because of the way the erosion has happened. It literally looked like someone had just kind of sanded it, like clearly just cut it smoothly with a knife. So it's just interesting to see how the different arches form and what they look like. This arch here, if you've been to arches, this is in the windows area. This is the double arch. And then this one over here is just, I was out hiking one day and I came upon this arch, but what really struck me was this whole piece here, the roof of this arch, if you will. Like, as you can see, this is really thin sandstone, but it is just, this was just so pretty that it definitely caught my eye. Then there's, like I said, if you're out walking, you see arches. This is, none of these are on the maps or called out, but here's a little one here. Couple things about here. I want you to notice these people because I'm going to come back to this sculpture. But here, and you might see that there's actually some rock in there. This is a little arch that's just starting to form here. So who knows? Years from now, it might be a big arch. But what also was fascinating about this and why I took a picture, this hole here. This is just, it's literally like a round circle, like someone went in and sawed out a perfect circle in the rock. And I never did learn, how it came to be, but there it was. And it was just very interesting to see. And then if we were in the room together, I would say, hey, who could tell me what this is? Because this arch has a name and it's named after a car. This is actually called Jeep Arch. So if you look at it for a minute, you might be able to picture a Jeep in the arch. So I thought that was a pretty, once I looked at it, it was like, yeah, that name made sense. The other fun thing about this arch is actually on BLM land. You parked in the parking lot and you walked down, this was a trail, and then there were these rocks and there was this circle. And the trail actually was this drainage ditch through the rock. And the reason is that up here is a railroad that goes by, and they didn't want people crossing over the railroad because I guess periodically trains come by. So it was kind of a fun way to start the hike up to the arch. And then it was just an interesting, like, oh yeah, that shape makes sense to me. And then this arch, the interesting thing about this is hiking along the trail, and as you see this cairn here, which is the trail guide, you actually walk through the arch and then continue on your hike. So it was kind of a passageway. I thought it was an interesting use of an arch. And then this arch, where in the right-hand side might look like it's a really big arch, the reality is it's only about 1.5 feet tall. It's wide. It's probably about 3-4 feet wide. I got down, and yes, those are the La Salle Mountains. But what I also wanted to show you was this off to the left is what's supporting this side of the arch. As you can see, the erosion that has happened, this is kind of that salt layer, the erosion that has happened and how thin this is. And although it doesn't show in this picture, this rock above it is probably, I don't know, 50, 60 feet tall. So the amount of weight that is just on this little piece. So whether this arch will make it over time or just collapse upon itself, time will tell. And since I've talked about the LaSalle Mountains several times, I thought I'd give you a bigger view of the range. And they, like I said, this is when you're out hiking, they're always in the background. I was coming down a hike and, you know, here they are. And then this is a panoramic of them. So those are just some arches. You would see lots more. They're kind of like, you know, they're everywhere. Then I thought I'd talk a little bit about the hiking. And part of the reason I loved the hiking is it was slick rock hiking. I had never heard of slick rock hiking. I had never been to Utah. I had never been in the Southwest hiking. And this slick rock hiking is this rock. And the interesting thing about it is, as long as you keep moving on this rock, your feet stick to it. It's kind of like I guess it's a gravity thing, but it's also, it just is, it always fascinated me because it's like, sometimes I really wasn't quite sure if it would work, but it's like, you just kept moving along. So, and then the other thing I realized, I love being up high and kind of having drop offs on both sides where you have to either kind of hug the side or you hug the middle so you don't drop off. I really realized I love that sort of thing. So I'm just going to show you some pictures of some of those trails that I came across in my hikes. And this first one on the left-hand side, I love this because it was kind of a runway. It looked like you literally were going to just walk all the way out to the LaSalle Mountains. And obviously that wasn't the case. The trail went down. But it did, you're just walking along, and it was one of those that, you know, you stayed to the middle because on both sides you could have gone, whoop, didn't want to do that. And then here, as you can see, the cairns were the way most of the time the trails were marked. And so you'd look for the cairn, and then you'd obviously stay to the inside, and especially on this right-hand side, walk very close to this wall because this was a drop off of about 75 feet. So just stayed to the inside and then kind of went on and around and down. And that was, you know, this is that kind of grayish white rock. And then there's the red sandstone. One of the good things about sandstone is that sometimes, because if you're on a path that there's been a number of people on, you can see in this upper left picture, when I was standing down here, I couldn't see this cairn up here, but I knew that I started looking, it's like I could vaguely see where other people had walked. So it's like, they somehow walked up this wall. I guess I will too. And you literally, I felt like Spider-Man sometimes. You just started walking, and as long as you kept going, it was one of those things, if you walked with confidence, it worked. If you started like doubting your steps, you started slipping. So this was fun because you walked up here, went around, and then you ended up coming around. And here was definitely a place that you wanted to walk to the inside because this was probably about 100, 120 feet down. So you just kind of hugged the inside and went on down the trail. This was another one of those. I was actually up higher, and it's like, I'm going to take a picture of this because I knew I had to kind of mosey along here, get down, go down. And where I ended up is over here and then came down. And you can see the cairn here saying, okay, come this way, and then you'll make it on down. And the last pictures here, different rocks again, but you can see a couple different paths. This one you actually walked up and then you popped through that hole and then continued on the trail. And this one, because of the layers of sand, it was kind of like steps walking up. And this is what I loved about this hiking is it was both physical and mental because you really had to focus on what you were doing and, you know, make sure you knew where your next step was and where you were going. And yeah, but it was just fun. It was definitely fun. And the other thing was there was always beautiful things to look at. So you had to also focus on, do I want to look at the scenery now, or do I want to look at my feet and know where I'm going? So you balanced out the two. Then this was, I was on a hike and going down the trail, I came to this rock on the left-hand side. And the trail had been coming along in this way, and I didn't see a cairn, so I thought, oh my gosh, I got to climb this rock. And it doesn't show in this picture, but this was a pretty straight up. But you know, there's a few places you could grab on, so it was kind of like a grab, pull yourself, get a foothold. I made it all the way to the top. And when I got up there, I realized that, I really wasn't on the right trail, because once I got up to the top, it was just a like sheer face down on the other side. And I looked to my left and it was like, nope, there was this wide crevice that I wasn't going to be able to cross. So I came back down and I got to this middle. And so what I ended up doing was I walked down the rock kind of to the left. And what basically is a rock kind of, curved around. And this is what I came to. And instead of going over the rock, I really needed to go through the rock. So hiked up in here. And if you're thinking, that looks pretty narrow, it was pretty narrow. It got a little bigger inside. And then you see in the right-hand picture, this is where I came out. And what was fascinating to me is that this was all gray and white rock. When I came out, it was more the red sandstone. But when I came out, I was still up high. So this log is probably about 8 to 10 feet. And so you hung on to either side of the rock and kind of did a balance beam, walk down the log, and then continued on the hike. And then this trail, if any of you have been to Canyonlands Isle in the Sky and did the Incline Loop, you might recognize some of this. When you do the Incline Loop, there's a couple of things. First of all, it tells you that it is the trail in the park where they have the most rescue calls, that they are going out to find people get lost, they warn you, make sure you have a headlamp, make sure, take all the precautions. And then I didn't put a picture of it, but I love this. As you're walking, as you start the hike, you come to this first warning sign that says, you are on the 8.3 mile Incline Loop trail. This trail is very strenuous and difficult to follow. Then you walk, I don't know, maybe half mile further, you get that same warning. And then it says, turn around to return to the trailhead, 1 mile. And then if you don't turn around, you're on the trail. And part of it is you go down 1,300 feet on steep switchbacks. And then, I'm sure many of you have hiked, and if you go down 1,300 feet, at some point you have to come back up 1,300 feet. And part of the coming back up is you're doing more bouldering and scrambling. This is some of the trail. And the trail is, I can see why they might have some search and rescues. The trail, you needed a good map, and you really needed to pay attention, because when you see all this rock, the way they mark trails is with cairns. When you have this many rocks to determine what's truly a cairn and the way you want to go, and what's truly just a pile of rocks that may have fallen down the mountain, different things. But here in the right-hand picture, you can see a little bit of the trail here, and it goes up. And then it was kind of a scramble over some of these rocks. And then it went this way. And then I took another picture because I was thinking, oh, almost there. And it's like, nope, further up. So that's kind of the middle picture. And these two are looking down as you're standing at the top, because I thought it was going to be like, oh, I'm up and then we'll just kind of walk along the top or continue. It's like, no, they had you go all the way up over the top, and then you actually had to come down some to continue on to the hike. So it was lots of fun. I love rock scrambling. I'll show you, these are some of the bigger boulders. But again, having cairns wasn't real practical. If you see this this piece right here didn't show up because of the sunshine. There's actually an arrow here that points that this is the way up. And it literally is up through these rocks, and you're going over and going up more rocks. So it was just, I thought it was a great trail. I had lots of fun with it, but I could definitely see where it could be challenging. If you got off the trail, finding your way back could definitely be difficult. And then the other piece was, because there's so many rocks and there's so many different changes in elevation, sometimes it's the ladder route. And these are just a few of the ladders that I came upon. This first one on the left, if you're looking at that, and this ladder is probably about 10 feet tall, and if you're looking at that saying, that ladder is probably about 3 feet wide and it doesn't look like this is much wider, you're right. So the thing about this that was a little difficult is you walk down the ladder and you're obviously facing the ladder as you're walking down. But once you get down to the bottom of the ladder, you really want to turn around, because these rocks are not just an easy step down. You have to do some little scrambling over them. But to turn around with a pack on your back, I did it. It's like, boy, if you were a larger person, you would really have some maneuvering to do in the little cavern. This middle picture and was one up, and then this is one down. But this middle picture, some people minded the ladders. I didn't. What I think was also a little unnerving about this, if you see the ladder, this rock going, oh, I'm pointing at it and I realize you can't see my pointing. You see the ladder, this rock going down, this is a pretty steep drop off. So you're getting on a ladder near a steep drop off, and this can be a little slippery. So you just have to manage everything. So then you go up. But I found the most difficult thing is, like, once you hit the top, it's like getting to the other side of the ladder, getting footing on the rock, and then continuing on. And then in this one, this literally reminded me, if you've ever gone to a water park and you've gone down one of those rides and you get to the toilet bowl that you do the twisty at the bottom, this is what you were doing over here, because you were, as I came down, the way this rock was, you kind of had to do a little circle to get down to the ladder. And then the ladder had, it had nice long, the two side things, whatever you call those. But the first rung was a little ways down. So like you kind of had to hang on to those side things and put a foot down, kind of on the faith that you were eventually going to get to one of the rungs. So it was just another one of those challenges, but great fun. So that's kind of some of the hiking that was really fun. And now I'm just going to talk about a few other things that I found interesting that I learned about. This is a Utah juniper pine, and they're desert pine trees. They've adapted to living in the desert, and the way they've adapted, if you notice the trunk and how twisted it is, and then you also notice that there's dead parts of the tree, that's how they adapt. So in years of little water, instead of growing taller, they grow sideways, and then they come back and grow sideways. And then if water is really scarce, they stop giving water to all of its branches. Like some branches get water and continue to grow, and then other branches just die off. So you'll see trees, some of them look healthy, some of them are half dead, but I thought it was a wonderful way of seeing how nature adapts. And then this was a place in Arches. This is one of those trails that I learned about because I worked there. This trail, for about 2 miles, this is just all rock that has fallen down from the hillsides. Someone told me that these were agates. Someone else said, no, they're not agates. There's some other type of rock. I don't know what type of rock they are, but they are beautiful. You can especially see in the left-hand picture, there's pinks and purples and oranges and dark grays and light grays. And as you can see in the pictures, some of them are as big as my foot, some of them are as big as my hand, some of them are smaller pieces. But you walk for 2 miles just looking at this beauty out in the desert. And because it's not at a part of the park that is on any maps and not necessarily, I mean, you can go there, but most people don't know about it. No one has, no one's taken anything. Everything just sits there as it's been probably for, I don't know, centuries, who knows? But it's just, so it's just fun. I find it fun to see things like that, people, I find it enjoyable. It's just fascinating to me. And then because I know there's dog lovers in the crowd, I thought this was an ingenious thing, because when you walk in the desert, sometimes with the wind, you can get a lot of sand. Well, they have dog goggles, and this dog was just oh so happy wearing his goggles. We were doing a little photo shoot with the dogs, so a couple owners were. So I'm like, can I take a picture? So I thought I'd include that as a public service announcement for any of you that'll be taking your dogs out someplace in the wind. And then the other thing, when I talk about the natural beauty, for me, it's the rocks. I could sit for hours and just look at the rocks. These pictures are one day when I was on a hike, and I hiked actually all the way down into this valley. So these walls are probably 100+ feet tall. And, the top kind of shows you some of the circular, and it goes into the next frame on the right. And then I did a panorama shot of it to kind of try to give you the visualization. And as you know, as you try to shoot something this grand, it never quite looks the same, but hopefully you just get a sense of the majesty of it and the layers of the rock. And I just found the rocks so beautiful. And that's what these next pictures are, just different places that I saw the rocks and the scenery, those little Sal Mountains in the background again. But it was just, it fascinated me as to what they looked like, how they just eroded over time, and what was left behind. And these are just closer pictures. Sometimes that white to me looked like it was like someone came along with frosting. The red was there and they put some frosting in some different places. And then, I talk about the sandstone layers. I put this in because just to show you, you can really see that layer by layer by layer by layer, this went, that's how they were forced down. And now as they're coming up, that's how they look like. And I don't think I said this earlier, but they figured that, in the last, I don't know how many millions of years, there's at least a mile of earth that has been eroded in this area to get to the landscape we're seeing today. And then on the right-hand side, when there's softer sand, you start getting these towers of things that are just, again, I think very interesting. This is in closer. This picture on the left-hand side, the orange and the dark orange, the black, and it literally looked like someone carved the rock. And to know that that just all happens by water and erosion, I find fascinating. And then I included a couple other pictures, on the right-hand side, just this is harder sandstone, and wind and water just erode everything else. And, to me, these look like just some big mushrooms. Okay, Barry and Jen, you might not see mushrooms, but I kind of see mushrooms. And then this one was a whole different, let me get to my place. Sorry about this. Okay. And then this was a whole different look of what happened to the rock. And then what was interesting is this middle picture, and why I showed the other ones, is it clearly at some time, this was probably standing straight up and it fell over time. And now it makes the base on which we walk across this as we walk across these other two. But again, the colors of the rock were just I just found them exquisite. And then again, and more of this, and then this one on the right-hand side, you know, when you go to Arches, if you're kind of there for a day or two, you see the balanced rock, which is one of the things that many people want to see. But as I hiked around, I realized that oftentimes there's many more balanced rocks as you see on the right-hand side. And what's interesting is when they're out like this, you can go up to them, and it just is amazing how you can have this little platform and this huge rock that just balances on it. So as you can tell, I was quite taken by the whole scenery. Then you know, you have rocks that look like things. So this was some of my discoveries. This one, to me, and again, I wish we were in the room because I would ask you folks, like, what do you think? What do you see? Well, for me, in the upper left-hand side, I saw a man's face. I saw, like, these were the glasses, the nose, the mouth, and then kind of like a top hat, white top hat with a brown brim. This one, I actually hiked along this and could see this a long ways in the distance. I called it Turtle Rock. I saw a turtle in it. You can see the little head. I saw the little head and then the shell. This is kind of an iconic view when you drive into the park. This is known as the Three Wanderers, the Three Gossips. It's, you know, it's definitely a landmark you will see if you're driving in the park. The two pictures below it, and I just lost my cursor, so I'm not, okay, the two pictures below it, when I was on a hike, I was actually on the back side of the Three Gossips. And I took a couple pictures because it's just so interesting how different a rock can look from the front side to the back side. And especially this right-hand picture, to me, it looked like two people, kind of like two cartoonish characters. And then this one over here was Sheep Rock. And to me, I think it's a ram. It looks like a big old sheep. You know, you can see maybe the face here and the head. So just some fun with rock shapes. Then I thought I would leave you with this. When I was at Canyonland Needles Park, and I came upon this, and I'm just going to read a little bit of this to you. You've come to the end of the road. Do you wonder what's out there? This curiosity has driven human exploration for millennia. A wild and untamed landscape begins where the pavement ends. We often refer to places where human impacts are minimal as wilderness. What does that mean? The Wilderness Act of 1964 defined wilderness an area where the earth and its community of life are untrammeled by man, where man himself is a visitor who does not remain. President Lyndon B. Johnson said of the Wilderness Act, if future generations are to remember us with gratitude rather than contempt, we must leave them something more than the miracles of technology. We must leave them a glimpse of the world as it was in the beginning, not just after we get through with it. So here's just a picture of one of the pictures that might be the end of the road. And now I want to transition a little and talk to you about volunteering. Maybe you've sat through this, and it's hard. I wish I could see people's faces because it's like I love volunteering, and hopefully you get a sense of it's. I think it's great. But so if you're thinking about volunteering, some considerations are, where do you want to go? And what's interesting is, for me, this was all about going to Arches. I actually wasn't necessarily thinking about volunteering this year. I just had a lot of other travel I was going to do. And in November of last year, I just happened to go on volunteer.gov. I often go just to check it out. And it was like, they wanted a campground host at Arches National Park. I'd never been a campground host, but it's like, I want to go to Arches. I want to go to Utah. So I applied. Not do. The thing for me, the one thing I do not want to do is clean toilets. I will tell you, it could be a fantastic job, but if it says I have to clean toilets, it's a non-starter. So it's just knowing that. Do you want to work as part of a team? I personally like working as part of a team. To me, I learn from other people, and it's fun to have people to bounce ideas off, that sort of thing. That's something important to me. How long do you want to volunteer? This year I only had a couple months, so I happened lucked into something. They only needed someone for a couple months. The other thing is being a self-starter and comfortable working independently. That has consistently come up in all of my assignments. So knowing that about yourself and how you would do that would be a good thing. And then just some tips and suggestions. Really think about the length of time of an assignment. I've worked anywhere from 2 to 4 months. And for me, I don't know that I would take an assignment that's more than 4 months. It's kind of like I really enjoy it, but then it's like, well, I'm ready to do some other things, or to have some of my free time back to maybe pursue some other things. There's lots of great places beyond the well-known national parks, and I actually think you learn a lot, and there's just so much beauty to be seen. Quite honestly, at some of the national parks, and I've talked to volunteers that have been at like some of the big parks, because there is so many visitors, their assignments there have probably been a little less enjoyable because you're busy every moment. And it sometimes is more stressful than some of the other parks. So just some considerations. And I'll tell you the website in a minute, but I would say if you're interested, look at it months before you want to apply. I actually started looking at it over a year before I started applying, because it's this casting a wide net and then refining. So you start getting a sense of what are some of the jobs, what might I want to do? And positions are typically published for 6 to 12 months out. I've even seen some for 18 to 24. If there's a contact person, call them to discuss the position if you have some questions, because from their standpoint, they really want to find people that are going to be a good fit, because as we all know, national parks are not well staffed, budgets are issues, and you don't want, if you're the volunteer coordinator, you want to make sure that the people that are showing up are going to like the position. And that's why they will discuss the downside of the position in the interview. It took me back the first time, because it's like, why are you telling me everything I might not like about this? And what they really want to do is make sure that you know what you're getting into, so that you don't show up and then after a couple of weeks say, no, thank you, I'm going to leave, because then they're kind of stuck, and it can be, it can be difficult sometimes. So, www.volunteer.gov is the website. On the left-hand side, these are all the different agencies that actually put jobs there. That, it's not just national parks, it's the Forest Service, Fish and Wildlife Service, Department of the Interior, U.S. Army Corps of Engineer. If you're a former, police officer, there's a U.S. Park Police that are looking for volunteers. So it's a wide range of options. There's also a wide range of housing options. Like I said, I had always used my RV, and then this year they put me in a little cabin that was just great. So it can go the gamut. And then also I just look for general, but you can see there's all sorts of specific talents that they're looking for at times. So that if you have a specific talent that you think a park might enjoy, that is another way that they would potentially consider you for a volunteer. So, lots of options out there, just figuring what might work for you. So those are that's my prepared presentation. So I will open it up for comments, questions.
Hey, Karen, it's Melissa Brown. I typed a couple or 3 questions in the chat thing, but I'll just
Okay.
ask you, did you
Okay.
when you went hiking, did you let anybody know where you were going?
So, excellent question, Melissa. So there were a couple of things that I did, because first of all, they said, oh, you really shouldn't hike by yourself, but it was like I was by myself.
Yeah.
So my two safety things that I did. One, I always left a note on my table
Oh,
in my
okay.
cabin, and I would tell my coworkers, oh, I'm going out hiking tomorrow. I'll leave a note. So I always left a note about where I was. And then I was very fortunate. I had a satellite radio for
Oh,
my job.
okay.
And the satellite radio worked at Arches State Park. It worked at Canyonlands. It also worked on some of the BLM land. And it would get me back to the sheriff's office in Moab. It would get me to the parks. So I felt as long as I didn't bump my head and I was out cold,
Yeah.
I did have a means of communication.
So there isn't, so that makes me guess there's not cell phone service in the park. It's a satellite thing that's really keeping you connected to the world.
Yes, no, and I mean, as a matter of fact, in the park itself, I did not have cell phone service in the cabin I stayed at.
Oh, wow.
The only cell phone service was up at the top of the hill of the campground.
Okay.
So,
okay. You know, and were those ladders attached to the walls you were climbing up, or do they fall off and?
no, they were definitely attached.
Okay. All right. The pictures were gorgeous. It just looks like so much fun.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I missed the beginning, so maybe the first 5 minutes. But I was wondering how, with that little amount of rainfall you have there, how that all got eroded into the arches, or how that worked.
Well, so what's interesting is that actually 8 to 10 inches of rainfall that they get, they said is actually the perfect amount, because when it rains, it sinks into the rock and then the erosion happens. And they said that needs to happen slowly over time, that if they got a lot more rain, that it would happen too fast and the arches would just collapse. But by happening slower over time, it erodes, and then the sand that's left dries out and hardens.
Okay. Oh, okay. So how long does it take to make one of those arches? Did they say, or is it thousands of years?
No.
Or, oh, okay.
Thousands of years. You know, it depends. I'm actually going back this year again.
Oh.
So there are a couple of arches that because it looked like they were in the formation stages. So there are a couple places that I'm going to plan to go out and just look at again, because I'm interested in seeing what they'll look like this year.
Those are gorgeous pictures.
Karen, your pictures are beautiful. I'm just wondering if you used a camera or if that was all with a phone.
That was all with a phone.
Wow. And did you ever have a moment where you had a bit of panic that you lost the route and would never find your way back? I've had that myself.
Okay, Roger, I will admit that I did. One time I went on a hike. The other thing I had that was very helpful, because it came in useful on this hike, is I had a hiking watch that, you track your hike, but when you get to the point where you need to turn around, you can say hike back, and it'll show you the route. Because I went hiking and I should have gone right. Instead, I went left. So I went around this rock mountain, and the whole time, it was one of those hikes that I was on that it was like, I'm not really seeing a lot of the trail, but then, it's like, well, it's got to be here. So you talk yourself into it, and it's a lot of rocks. So it's like, oh, maybe that's a cairn. Oh, look, it looks like someone's walked here. And a lot of the time it was very close to an edge. And it's like, this seems like a rather dangerous trail to send a lot of people over, but oh well, I'll continue. And off I did continue 2 miles up into the canyon, on the hike. So it wasn't just a little out of my way. And then I realized it was like, I'm I'm not getting to where I thought I would be. So I did. I hit the hike back, and I got back, and on another day, I went on the hike. I went back because, and then I started asking people about it, and everyone that talked about the hike said, well, yeah, it's really, it's not that bad, and you just go up and you're right there. And I'm like, okay, clearly I did something wrong. And I realized that it was one of those times that because I tried to figure out what mistake did I make so I wouldn't do it again. And what it was, as I was heading up, I saw some people up further on the rock, and I saw where they were walking. And instead of focusing on the cairns and what the map was telling me, I'm like, oh, they went that way. Well, little did I know, I'm not even sure why they were going that way, but they were not going where I was going. So I'm a big believer in following the map and following the cairns.
Did you say that was a hiking watch?
Yeah, it's a Garmin. It's an InSync. You can do many things with it. Tracking a hike is one of them.
Okay, thanks.
How many hours a day did you work when you were working your 4 days off and 4 days on?
So here's the thing. They said technically I worked 32 hours. That's what was expected. And it was kind of like the suggested schedule was you work early in the morning till midday, and then you start later in the afternoon, into the evening, probably 8, 9 o'clock. Most of the time when I worked my 4 days, I typically, because then you had this lull in the afternoon, and it's like I didn't feel like I could go off and do something because I wanted to be around. So I typically, when I worked those 4 days, I would oftentimes in the afternoon, I might walk over to the Devil's Garden parking lot, which is a big trailhead. Sometimes I picked up trash in the afternoon just because I knew it needed to be done. I would do some other things like that. But the true expectation was 32 hours. I think I probably worked more like 40, 42 hours in those 4 days. But then I had, then the 4 days off were purely 4 days off. Then I didn't, there was no expectation at all that I would do anything during the other 4 days.
Well, that's not too bad. That's not too bad of a schedule, actually. It's a lot of time off to do things that you want to do.
Yeah, it was, that's what, typically other times, other places I worked, it might be a 4 day, work 4 days, take 3 days, 3 days off. But it was nice having 4 days off. And especially because, like I said, with Moab being an hour away, that on one of the days off, you'd have to go in and do the groceries and some of those types of things. And, it could take a good part of the day.
Karen, did
Yep.
you see the movie Nomadland?
I did.
Okay, so one of the main characters was a campground host in the Badlands, and I
Yeah.
believe she got paid, but she also had to clean toilets. So I'm guessing somebody else cleaned the toilets?
Maintenance. Oh my gosh. Maintenance. Yes. Maintenance. So mainly, and that was the thing. So this is something, if you're ever considering being a campground host, as far as I can tell, national parks do not require their campground host to clean toilets. It's taken care of by maintenance. U.S. Forest Service typically seems to require campground hosts to clean the toilets. So I think it's one of those things that depends on the agency and what the expectations are. Now, the other thing I don't think I mentioned this at the beginning. So, if any of you have done some great things Fran, I'm putting in a little plug for you. And I was thinking, gee, maybe I'd like to give a presentation at some point. I want you to know you do not need to be in Minneapolis to do this. You may not know this, but I'm actually at a campground in Maricopa County in Arizona. So you could be anywhere giving a presentation. So just a little plug, and you can contact Fran if you have a great idea for a presentation that you would like to give.
Thanks, Karen. It's been one of the nice things about being on Zoom is I can have presenters come in from anywhere.
Any other questions, comments?
What was the biggest task you did every day on your 4 days of work then? Or was the
So the biggest thing, it was like really managing reservations. And the thing is,
curious what to do?
and in knowing what sites were open, what sites were reserved, because, and the way we handled no-shows, and no-shows are actually a problem at national parks, because especially people that have senior passes, it basically costs $12 to $15 to camp per night in a national park. So people will make reservations maybe at a few national parks and then won't cancel them. So what we did, we said, if you have a multi-night reservation, if you weren't there by 5 p.m. the next day, we would typically give your site away to someone else. And in all the times we did that, there was only once someone showed up. And these people had reservations for 7 nights. They showed up on the 4th night. And they were just so upset that we had given their campsite away. And it's like, you were 4 nights in. They're like, well, we just wanted to do some other things. So we did accommodate them, but it was just, that was one of the things, having to deal with that. But on the other hand, I have never worked at a job that I was thanked so much for just doing my job. It was like people acted like I went out and manufactured a campsite for them. The other thing I do have to say that was funny is that sometimes people would stop by to check in on their way in. And they'd say, well, I know I'm early because, I don't know, check-in was 1 p.m. or whatever. They said, I know I'm early. They said, have you had a chance to clean the campsite yet? And the first time they asked me the question, I'm like, clean the campsite. And then after that, I'd look them in the eye and say, oh yeah, I've cleaned the whole thing. You're all set. Just go on up. And I'm thinking to myself, it's like,
you dusted the dust.
I'm doing with their campsite that I'm cleaning the campsite. So, but I actually have found out since I've been in Arizona that, and I'm not sure why, but here they actually rake the campsite between campers. Well, and I guess maybe because there's no lawn. So, and the other thing is, if any of you ever want to camp at Arches, it is a beautiful campground. Many people have said it's probably one of their favorites. And part of it is it's only 53 campsites, so there's not that many campsites, but it's also, they've done a wonderful job of building the campsites into the landscape. And because it's all rock, most of the campsites, they're pretty, like, you have room and privacy between each of the campsites. So it is a beautiful place to stay.
Well, that was my next question, with it being a small campsite, besides, going to the trailhead and picking up garbage and so forth, did you feel like you kept busy enough during those hours of the time that you were actually working?
Yeah, sometimes I kept busy. Sometimes I maybe sat and read a book and waited for people to come by with a question. So, it was because you live where you work, I could certainly do other things around the cabin when I was if I was, even if it was a day that I was working, and you know, if there wasn't any people that had questions or anything.
Hey, Karen,
It was not a high stress job.
did you mention what time of the year you were there? Isn't it really
Oh,
hot in
no.
Arches midsummer?
I don't think I did, Craig. I was actually there in March and April, which in my estimation was a wonderful time to be there. Because it's before the beginning of March was a little, but then it was just beautiful temperatures. And by the time I was leaving in April, it was starting to get hot. I mean, I could not work there in the summertime. In the summertime, it is in 90, 100 day in, day out, which I'm not a hot weather person like that.
We went in November of last year and it was perfect temperature. It was absolutely beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Yep. The shoulder seasons are definitely the time to visit there.
Any last questions? No? Well, thanks very much, Karen. Great presentation. I'm sure we're all jealous.
Thank you.
So,
Yeah, thanks, Karen. I think it's cool that you've done this multiple years, so we've got multiple adventures to talk about.
Yeah, it's fun.
And it was very organized. It was good. You had like section by section. It was great.
Oh, well, thank you.
Very good. Very good.
So Karen, I have one question.
What?
Where are you going next?
So I'm actually going back to Arches for March and April again.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it was in part of, so, and this is one of the things I'll also say, because Utah has so many national parks that I feel like there's so many more places I want to see in Utah. So I thought, you know what, why not go back for another time? I did the job, I enjoyed it. It was like, and there's a whole bunch more I can see. So my guess is I don't think I'll go back again after this. It's like, because there's just so many other places to go.